Hey guys, what's up? It's Eric, and this is on the Los Angeles homeless crisis that's going on. It's not much in the news right now. It was way all about in the news, all over the place before COVID hit. I'm assuming that it's going to actually come back in the news after the whole COVID virus deal has kind of passed over a little bit, because it is something in LA that was, and it still is, this huge growing problem. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is I wanted to kind of actually go through the scenario that I feel I would go through when it comes to this, because there's a huge growing homeless population in LA. And they like to blame it now. I mean, after everything that they've talked about of is it the cost of living, mental illness, mental health, is it, addiction, whatever it is, they finally have pinned it on addiction. Addiction is the reason that we have this huge homeless population, this huge homeless crisis going on in LA. And I want to say that I don't really think that is the case. And I'll talk to you and show you how and why I feel that way. If you're new to my channel, hit the like and subscribe button. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm none of that. My name is Eric. I deal with ADHD, PTSD, GAD, and MDD. Those are my diagnoses. I have lost a wife and a father to suicide, and I'm a recovering cocaine and alcoholic addict. And I like to share all the experiences, tools, and resources that I can just to help somebody feel a little bit less alone. And this is something that I feel actually goes to any areas, especially when there's a huge homeless population. What you find is most metropolitan areas where there is a higher cost of living, the homeless population naturally is also higher. And what I've watched is they've all painted it, at least in LA, around addiction. And I've been sober from alcohol and cocaine for a little over 2.5 years. Those were my drugs of choice. And ultimately, when I was heavily in my using phase, it was because I wanted to numb everything. It was the most unhealthy, destructive way to numb everything, but it took all the pain away. It took reality away. I didn't have to live in this reality. I was killing myself and destroying everything around me, but I didn't have to live in this reality. And that was one of the things that I still even fight with. As an addict in recovery, it is one day at a time. So I've always kind of played through, as I've watched this play out in the news, of my thoughts on the homeless population and this growing homeless rate in LA. And here are my thoughts. So I live in Orange County. I live right by LA. My cost of living, I have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. It's not a very large house. Anybody who's ever visited me from Texas, Michigan, from Nevada, they've seen my house. They go, hey, it's kind of a nice place. Like where I live, this would be rent like $700 a month. And that's true. I mean, I grew up in Michigan. I've lived a lot of different places. By far, this is the most expensive place I've ever lived. And when I tell them my rent of $2,900 a month before utilities, most people go, are you kidding me? Because I'm not in a gated community. I'm not down by the beach or any of that. There is nothing extravagant about my house at all. And I rent. To own a house here is even more expensive. So the higher and higher the cost of living here in California gets, the more and more the homeless population grows. And I have to say, I believe that is a lot to do with the cost of living here. There is no affordable housing here, because what ends up happening is once you can't afford necessarily where you live, well, your credits probably went to shit because you've done everything you can to save where you're living. So you've missed other bills. Now you can't rent anywhere, and you're left with very few options. And so I've been very thankful that I have had family be able to step in at times when I've needed them to. At times I've made phenomenal money. At times I've made very little money. And I thought about myself and went, man, why do I think, just from my opinion, from what I've been through and what I struggle with and what I'm diagnosed with, why is there this big homeless population increase? And why is it such an epidemic in a sense when it comes to just everybody? Drug use is at an all-time high there. I mean, it is very rampant in the homeless communities. Well, okay, let's take my scenario, is what I figured. And if I was to get to the point that I couldn't afford my rent or anything like that, I'm struggling, I'm going to miss other bills. And I already have. If you didn't know, I had my truck actually repoed back in December. I got it out of repo and all that, but you'll lose other bills and miss other bills to protect your house, to keep a house over your head. And I've done that. I personally have done that. Being a mental health advocate does not pay you anything. And when I put more energy into this than I do my work, well, that's what happens. So your credit goes to shit. My credit has went to shit. When I rented this house, I was a 760 FICO. I am probably low fives now. So I'm not going to be able to rent another place anytime soon. I have to rebuild my credit again. And I've done it before. So if I lose this house, I don't have many options. If I didn't have any family here or any kind of structure here, what do I do? I'm essentially homeless. Well, I am diagnosed with ADHD, PTSD, GAD, and MDD. And the hard stigma around depression is people will be like, oh, so you're depressed. Let me give you $1 million and you won't be depressed anymore. No, will it help? Yeah, it will help in a lot of areas, but it doesn't mean that it's going to cure my MDD by any means, or cure my depression, or cure my anxiety, or cure my ADHD. It's not going to. I'm going to still struggle with that. So if I was to not be able to afford this house and get to the point that I have to lose my house, I can't rent another place. I'm now homeless. If I didn't have any family or anything here, I am going to tell you this, I will relapse right away. And I have no problem saying that, because the biggest thing is when it comes to the rates of suicide rate is the highest. It's the number one leading cause of death in males 25 to 45 years old. I'm a male. We have big egos. Instantly, if I lose the house and I can't move anywhere, I have failed. That's going to be right on my brain. And failure is a huge trigger for me when it comes to self-harm, when it came to why I self-medicated, to a lot of different things. I can tell you this, being forced out on the street, I would go kicking and screaming. And when I was finally forced out on the street, living out of probably my vehicle at the time, if I still had it, if I didn't have it, I'd be truly homeless. My life is pretty much over. I know that. As I watch and more want to move out of California, because I know that this is an actual part of reality that could happen. I also can't afford where I'm living. We're homeless. I'm going to end up relapsing because I'm going to need to numb it. I'm going to have to stop the insanity in my brain of the massive feeling of failure, and get to the point that, I just don't really give any fucks. And that's the sad part about it. And I think what a lot of people miss is when it comes to a lot of addicts, and why I think there's an increase in even the drug use, is I think a lot of the people that are homeless right now, that necessarily weren't homeless a year ago or 2 years ago, were probably sober then. And it causes us to relapse when we have those massive stressors. I mean, no matter how much we can get with our sponsors and help and get into the sobriety community, at a certain point, I've watched addicts left and right crumble under massive amounts of stress. And even the fact of losing your home is a massive stressor, which can add to panic attacks. It can trigger up that depression, that self-defeating, that hopelessness. And as soon as a lot of that sets in, I mean, people do look at suicide as a solution to which is not necessarily the route to go at all. But I understand, though, where they're coming from. To be homeless is one of the scariest things on my brain, because, man, if I was younger, I don't think I would be as scared about it, but I'm almost 40 years old. I mean, how many more times in my life do I have to rebuild my life? It is a grim reality, and it's something that does mess with my head. And anxiety is that uncontrollable, unsurmountable amount of fear that it just seeps in from all over the place. And that does actually rent space in my brain when it comes to my anxiety of, man, I'm living in a place that's extremely expensive. What happens if I go homeless? And then all of a sudden I'm homeless, and now I've relapsed, and nobody addresses that situation. I mean, being out on the street, I know that my depression is going to be at an all-time high. My anxiety is going to be at an all-time high. I'm going to be freaking out at different situations. I'm going to be panicking a lot. I'm going to be self-numbing a lot, which means I'm going to be back heavily in addiction. Most likely because I know how I feel when I use my drugs of choice, that it numbs it all, that it is expensive. Yeah, I'm going to beg, borrow, and steal to feed that addiction, to at least numb that part of my brain of what I'm going through. It's a very, very scary reality. And it's something that people don't see the whole full domino effect. They're going, I can tell you right now, I have no desire to relapse, but put me out on the street where I can't afford to live here, I'm going to probably relapse if I wasn't in a position that I could move. And it's not an excuse. I think what it is more of a reality. It's going to flare up all of the shit that I deal with when it comes to depression, when it comes to my anxiety. And I'm going to have to try and stop it somehow. And I'm not going to have any insurance. So how am I going to even see a doctor to get the right medication? I'm not going to have my Adderall anymore. I won't have my Xanax anymore. What do? Numb it. And that's why I think that it is one of those things that becomes so big. And let's face it, when we're heavy in addiction, we don't want anything else but our addiction. If I'm out on the street and I'm heavily using and I am numb to everything, then no, I don't really care. I don't even want to be alive. I mean, that's the way that I look at it. And it's a scary reality. And again, it might be only my opinion, but it's something I wanted to throw out there because nobody ever talks about that side of it. It's all, oh, well, drugs are really rampant and, marijuana's legal here. And they don't crack down very hard on some of the harder drugs out here anymore. And so it's like you can blame it on that, but I blame a lot of it on the cost of living. I blame a lot of people with the flare up of depression, anxiety on the cost of living because when you add stress into it, all it does is amplify your depression. It amplifies your anxiety to where it allows even different types of fear and different types of hopelessness and depression to seep in. And it's overlooked, I think, very, very heavily. And that's why we see a huge growth in it because it's getting harder and harder to afford to live here. And nobody seems to really care. And if I'm out on the street, I'm going to relapse. And then they can ultimately say, yep, see, he was an addict. It's all about the drugs. We got to fight the war on drugs. Why don't we go after the sources? Why don't we make sure that people who are on the street have access to mental health facilities that are able to help take care of them and go to the root of the challenges when it comes to our mental challenges? That alone, there is a correlation between mental illness and addiction. And again, it's not that way for everybody, but for me, and I know I'm not alone, I was an addict that self-medicated. If I'm out on the street, I'm going to be self-medicating. Otherwise, I'm going to go insane in my head. And ultimately, if it becomes too much hopelessness, it becomes too much fear, I'm going to end up to the point that I'm going to take my life. So I think that, the cost of living is the major reason behind the homeless epidemic. And it doesn't really have anything to do with addiction necessarily. And it doesn't have anything to do with necessarily mental illness. I think all it does is amplify those and push those more into the spotlight because that's what people are defaulting back to. Because we don't have the ability and the use of the services that we once did. When it comes to the cost of living, if you can't afford a place and you can't move and you don't have any help and family, what do you do? I mean, this is a scenario that does play through my head. And so I thought it would be interesting just to kind of share on it and get everybody's thoughts because I don't think it has to do with just LA. I think it has to do with homeless in general. I do think that there is a correlation there to a certain extent because being homeless, like with me especially, and I know a lot of other people that struggle even with self-harm, failure is a trigger out there for some people that we self-destruct on ourselves. And once we self-destruct on ourselves, we relapse in self-harm, we relapse with addiction, and so many different things that all of a sudden, there's only so many times you're going to relapse until there is no more relapses because you know what, you ended up ODing or, you cut too deep. I mean, that's the grim reality of it. And so I think it is something that always should be addressed is cost of living and the free mental health services that are available. I mean, that's why I'm very adamant about bridging the gap between a crisis hotline and therapy, just with free resources, with free support, because it does make a difference. And that's what it's about, is making sure that nobody goes it alone, that you get access to what it is that you're struggling with, the tools that you need to keep fighting through because you're worth it and because it is worth it. And life can be beautiful. The biggest thing of all is that when we go down that path, if it gets too much, we collapse. There's only so much people can take, and I think that's a reality of it. If you haven't hit the like and subscribe button, hit the like and subscribe button. I'd love to have you comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts and your input on this because it's something that I want to really actually do more and more research on because I do find it's something that I think is overlooked and has a different spin on it than what reality is. That's what it really comes down to. And I know that a lot of people have struggled with this. So again, I'd love to know your thoughts. So hit that like and subscribe button. In the description, I have links to all my different social medias. I have links to the mental health Discord communities. That is free peer-to-peer support. I even have links down below to Amazon affiliate links for fidget cubes, fidget spinners, things like that that will help, that I use when it comes to my anxiety and things that I struggle with. Even have a link down below to BetterHelp. It's trial and error to find out what works for you, especially if you've never done therapy before. Even have a link below to the mental health rehab that I work with. Again, it's finding what works for you and knowing that you're not alone. I mean, you're an amazing human being. You're a BAMF. You're a badass motherfucker. You made it through 100% of your worst days and make it through 2 today. And you know what? Together we got this.